Nathan Prescott owned half of Manhattan's luxury skyline, 16 hotels, 3 residential towers, and a reputation that made grown investors sweat through their Armani shirts. He was 52 years old, $9.7 billion net worth, and he hadn't lost a deal in 14 years. So when he stood at the podium of the Prescott Grand and announced that Fairview Gardens assisted living, a crumbling 80-bed facility 4 blocks from his flagship hotel, would be demolished to make way for Prescott Residences, a $400 million luxury condo project, nobody in the room questioned it. Nobody except a maid. She was 18. She was standing in the back of the press conference in her housekeeping uniform, holding a tray of water glasses she'd been told to distribute. And when Nathan Prescott said the words, "Fairview Gardens will be vacated within 30 days," she dropped the tray. Glass shattered across the marble floor. 200 heads turned. Nathan Prescott looked at her for exactly 1 second, the way you look at a stain on an expensive carpet, and moved on. He had no idea that the girl with the broken glasses was about to break something far more valuable, the lie he'd been living for the last 10 years. Elena Reyes had been a maid at the Prescott Grand for 11 months. She worked the 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. shift, 5 days a week, $16.50 an hour, plus tips that rarely came. Because the kind of people who stayed at a $900 a night hotel didn't notice the people who cleaned their rooms. She was 18, the youngest on the housekeeping staff, and she'd lied on her application. Said she was 19 because the head of housekeeping, Mrs. Carmichael, didn't hire anyone under that age. Elena needed the job. Her mother, Rosa Reyes, had died 14 months ago in a 1-bedroom apartment in Washington Heights. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4 by the time they caught it, because Rosa hadn't had health insurance for 2 years, and the free clinic she went to had a 6-month wait for diagnostic imaging. Rosa was 41. She worked 3 jobs: night janitor at a public school, weekend cashier at a bodega on 168th Street, and until she was fired, daytime caregiver at Fairview Gardens Assisted Living. Rosa was fired from Fairview on a Tuesday. She was dead within a year. Elena didn't think those 2 facts were a coincidence. She just couldn't prove it yet. Every morning at 5:15 a.m., 45 minutes before her shift, Elena walked 4 blocks from the subway station to Fairview Gardens, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Not from Starbucks, she couldn't afford Starbucks. She made the coffee at home in a dented aluminum mocha pot her mother brought from Guatemala, using a specific blend: dark roast, a pinch of cinnamon, a half spoon of brown sugar. It was her mother's recipe. Rosa had made this coffee every morning for 5 years, first for herself and then for a patient. Every morning, rain or shine, snow or subway delays, Elena brought 2 cups to Fairview Gardens, one for herself, one for the woman in room 12. The woman's name was Grace. She was 74 years old, silver hair always pinned in a neat bun, hands that trembled when she held the cup but steadied when she brought it to her lips. Grace had good days and bad days. On good days, she knew Elena's name, asked about her classes at community college, and told stories about the Manhattan of the 1980s, the jazz clubs, the galleries, the night she danced on a rooftop in Soho and could see the Twin Towers lit up like candles. On bad days, she called Elena Rosie and asked when she was coming home. Elena never corrected her. Rosie was her mother's name. And on Grace's worst days, when she didn't recognize anyone, not Elena, not the nurses, not even her own reflection, she still recognized the coffee. She'd close her eyes, breathe in the cinnamon and brown sugar, and something in her face would soften a muscle memory of comfort that Alzheimer's couldn't reach. Elena had been making this visit for 3 years, since she was 15. Since her mother sat her down at the kitchen table 2 weeks before her first hospitalization and said, "Mija, there's a woman at Fairview, room 12. Her name is Grace. I need you to take care of her when I can't." Elena said, "Okay." She didn't ask why. She trusted her mother the way children trust gravity completely without understanding the mechanics. Rosa handed her the mocha pot, wrote down the coffee recipe on the back of an electricity bill, and said, "She likes it hot, not warm, hot. And she'll ask for your name every time. Tell her, every time, she deserves to hear a name." Elena asked one question. "Who is she, Mama?" Rosa looked at the kitchen wall for a long time. "She's the reason you went to school," Rosa said. "She's the reason we have this apartment. She's the reason I survived the first year in this country." She paused. "And she doesn't even remember." Elena never asked again. She just brought the coffee. Here's what everyone at the Prescott Grand knew about Nathan Prescott, self-made billionaire. Started with a single boutique hotel in the meatpacking district when he was 29, expanded through a combination of ruthless deal-making and an almost supernatural sense for undervalued real estate. Divorced once quietly, no children anyone knew about. Private to the point of paranoia. He had a corner office on the 40th floor with floor-to-ceiling windows, a desk that cost more than Elena's annual salary, and exactly one personal item, a framed photograph turned face down that no employee had ever seen the front of. The tabloids called him the Wolf of Park Avenue. His employees called him Mr. Prescott and nothing else. He walked through the lobby every morning at 7:45 a.m., nodded at the front desk, took the private elevator, and disappeared. He did not know the names of his housekeepers. He did not know that one of them woke up an hour early every day to bring coffee to a woman in a building he was about to destroy. Here's what nobody at the Prescott Grand knew about Nathan Prescott. His mother was alive. Her name was Grace Prescott, and she was in room 12 at Fairview Gardens drinking cinnamon coffee from a mocha pot, calling a dead woman's daughter Rosie, and waiting for a son who thought she'd been buried in Woodlawn Cemetery 10 years ago. The man who told Nathan his mother was dead was Victor Hale, Chief Financial Officer of Prescott Enterprises for 22 years. 60 years old, bald reading glasses perched permanently on the end of his nose, the kind of man who made numbers say whatever he needed them to say. Victor had been there from the beginning, back when Nathan was a 29-year-old with a maxed-out credit card and a dream about a hotel. Victor found the first investors. Victor structured the first deal. Victor handled the money while Nathan handled the vision. They were partners in everything but title. Nathan trusted Victor the way he trusted his own heartbeat automatically without question, because the alternative was unthinkable. Victor had earned that trust, or so it appeared, over 2 decades of steady, reliable, invisible work. He wasn't flashy. He didn't give speeches. He sat in the back of boardrooms, adjusted his glasses, and said things like, "The numbers support this," or "The numbers don't support this," and people listened. That was his power. Numbers. He made them speak. And for 22 years, they said exactly what Victor wanted them to say. In 2014, Grace Prescott was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's. She was 64. Nathan was devastated. Grace was the only family he had. His father had left when Nathan was 3, and Grace raised him alone in a studio apartment in Queens, working double shifts as a seamstress in the garment district. She packed his lunches. She walked him to school. She saved $40 a month in a coffee tin on top of the refrigerator for 18 years, and when Nathan turned 21, she handed him $8,640 and said, "Build something." He built an empire, and every Sunday, no matter how many deals were closing or how many cities he was flying to, he drove to Queens and had dinner with his mother, roast chicken, her recipe. Grace made the coffee. That specific blend, dark roast cinnamon brown sugar, the one that Rosa would later learn and Elena would later inherit. It was Grace's recipe all along. When the diagnosis came, Nathan wanted Grace to move into the penthouse. He wanted full-time care, the best neurologists, clinical trials. Victor said, "Let me handle it." Victor had handled everything for 20 years. Why would this be different? Victor found a private care facility in Connecticut, or so he told Nathan. He showed Nathan brochures. He arranged the transfer. Nathan visited twice. Both times Grace didn't recognize him. The second visit, she screamed when he touched her hand. Nathan left the facility with tears running down his face and told Victor he couldn't go back. "It's too hard," he said. "She doesn't know me." Victor nodded sympathetically. "I'll make sure she has the best care," he said. "You focus on the business." 6 months later, Victor told Nathan that Grace had passed, peacefully in her sleep. Victor handled the funeral arrangements, a small ceremony at Woodlawn. "Closed casket, per her wishes," Victor said. Nathan stood at his mother's grave and felt the kind of emptiness that money can't fill and work can't distract. He put the framed photograph on his desk face down, because looking at her smile while signing contracts felt like a betrayal of something sacred. Grace Prescott was not in that casket. She was in room 12 at Fairview Gardens, a facility Victor had chosen specifically because it was cheap, underfunded, and asked no questions. The private care facility in Connecticut never existed. The brochures were fabricated. The 2 visits Nathan made were to a rented space with hired actors, a performance Victor staged to make Nathan believe his mother was declining faster than she actually was. Why? Because Grace Prescott wasn't just Nathan's mother. She was also the original signatory on the Prescott Family Trust, a $240 million instrument that funded the company's early expansion. Victor had been siphoning from that trust for 15 years, rerouting funds through shell companies billing for services never rendered, paying himself consultant fees from entities he secretly controlled. Grace's signature was on every original document. Grace, in her lucid moments, remembered numbers the way musicians remember melodies. If she ever talked to the wrong person, if she ever had a good day in front of the wrong audience, the whole architecture would collapse. So Victor put her somewhere she'd never be found, told Nathan she was dead, and billed the trust $12,000 a month for a memorial maintenance fund that went straight into his pocket. Rosa Reyes discovered the fraud by accident. She was Grace's assigned caregiver at Fairview, a warm, attentive woman who actually read the facility's intake documents because she cared about her patients' histories. She noticed that Grace's file listed her as Grace Mitchell, no emergency contact, no family admitted as a ward of the state. But Grace, on her good days, talked about a son named Nathan who built hotels, about an apartment in Queens, about roast chicken on Sundays. Rosa started asking questions. She pulled billing records that didn't match patient counts. She found invoices for medical equipment that never arrived. She discovered that Fairview Gardens was receiving payments from a trust she'd never heard of, payments that were supposed to cover premium care that no patient in the building was receiving. Rosa documented everything. She photographed receipts. She copied files. And she made one critical mistake. She told the facility's administrator, a man named Dennis Blakely, that she planned to report the irregularities to the state. Dennis Blakely called Victor Hale that same afternoon. By Thursday, Rosa Reyes was terminated for theft of patient medication, a fabricated charge backed by falsified security footage. She was blacklisted from every healthcare facility in the tri-state area. Her nursing certification review was flagged. No one would hire her. Within 4 months, she was working 3 jobs, none of them in healthcare, none of them offering insurance. Within 8 months, the stomach pains she'd been ignoring became unbearable. Within 12 months, she was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Within 14 months, she was dead. She was 41 years old. She had 1 daughter, and her last coherent request was about coffee. Elena dropped the tray at the press conference because she understood something that no one else in that room did. If Fairview Gardens was demolished, Grace would be relocated. If Grace was relocated, Victor Hale would have to move her, and moving her meant paperwork, meant new intake documents, meant the possibility that someone somewhere would notice that Grace Mitchell had the same birthday, the same social security number, and the same face as Grace Prescott, the woman buried at Woodlawn Cemetery. Victor couldn't risk that. Elena had watched enough crime shows and read enough of her mother's hidden files to know what happened to inconvenient people in Victor Hale's world. If Fairview was demolished, Grace wouldn't be relocated. Grace would disappear. For real this time. Elena didn't go back to work after the press conference. She walked straight to Fairview Gardens, still in her uniform mascara, smudged from the tears she'd wiped away in the elevator. She brought the coffee. She sat with Grace. It was a bad day. Grace called her Rosie. Grace held the coffee cup with both hands and said, "You always make it perfect, Rosie, just like I taught you." Elena said, "I know, Grace. I learned from the best." Grace smiled, that faraway smile that lived in a place Alzheimer's couldn't touch. Then Grace said something she'd never said before. "Rosie, the cups. You kept the cups right." Elena blinked. "What cups, Grace?" "The cups I gave you. Don't throw them away. The numbers are on the cups." Grace's eyes were suddenly sharp, a window of lucidity that opened without warning the way they sometimes do. "I wrote them down, every month, on the bottoms. I knew someone would come." Then the window closed and Grace was gone again, humming a song Elena didn't recognize, staring at the wall. Elena went home that night and opened the cabinet above her refrigerator. It was a small cabinet warped from years of steam rising from the stove below, and it stuck when she pulled it. Inside, stacked carefully in 3 rows, were 27 white ceramic cups. For 3 years, Grace had asked her sometimes clearly in full sentences during lucid windows, sometimes in confused fragments reaching for Elena's hand and pressing a cup into it with urgent, trembling fingers to keep the cups. "Take this home, Rosie. Keep it safe. Don't let them throw it away." Elena had never refused. She washed each cup carefully, dried it with a clean towel, and placed it in the cabinet. Her roommate, a nursing student named Priya, who shared the $1,800 a month apartment in Washington Heights, once asked why Elena was hoarding old lady cups. "They're from a friend," Elena said. Priya didn't ask again. Elena had never thought to look at the bottoms. Why would she? They were cups. They held coffee. They were keepsakes from a woman who confused her with her dead mother. She turned the first one over. The bottom was slightly concave, a shallow bowl, and there, written in tiny shaking handwriting with a ballpoint pen pressed so hard it left grooves in the ceramic, VH Cayman Island account number 7734-0091340,000, January 2019. Elena stared at it. She turned the second cup. Shell Company Meridian Health, LLC, no patients, $12,000 per month billed to trust. The third, D. Blakely, $5,000 per month silence. She turned them all. 27 cups, 27 entries, dates spanning from 2016 to the present, each one a data point in a financial map that traced 15 years of theft, laundering, and cover-up. Account numbers, company names, dollar amounts, payoff schedules, all written by a woman the world thought was too far gone to remember her own son's name. Grace Prescott couldn't always remember what day it was. She sometimes thought Elena was Rosa. She sometimes thought it was 1987 and she needed to pick up Nathan from school. But she remembered numbers. She always remembered numbers. The neurologists would later call it domain-specific preserved memory, a phenomenon where Alzheimer's patients retain extraordinary recall in one narrow cognitive lane, while everything else erodes. For Grace, that lane was mathematics. She'd been a bookkeeper before she was a seamstress. Numbers were her first language, and for 10 years in a room the world forgot she'd been writing letters in that language on the bottoms of coffee cups, hoping that someone someday would turn them over. Elena sat on her kitchen floor, surrounded by 27 ceramic cups, arranged in chronological order, and cried. Not because she was sad, because her mother had known. Rosa had died trying to expose the same fraud that Grace had been documenting one coffee cup at a time for years. 2 women, one young, one old one who couldn't get anyone to listen, one who couldn't get anyone to believe she was lucid enough to speak, had been fighting the same war from different trenches. And they'd both entrusted their weapons to the same person, an 18-year-old maid who made cinnamon coffee before dawn. Elena knew she needed help. She couldn't go to the police. Her mother had tried official channels, and Victor's connections had crushed her. She couldn't go to the press. She had no credibility, no platform, no proof beyond numbers on coffee cups that any lawyer could dismiss as the ramblings of a dementia patient. She needed someone powerful enough to challenge Victor Hale. She needed Nathan Prescott. The problem was that Nathan Prescott had just announced he was demolishing the building where his not-dead mother lived, and the maid who'd dropped a tray of glasses at his press conference was probably about to be fired. Elena had 30 days. Grace had less. Elena was fired the next morning. Mrs. Carmichael called her into the supply closet they used as an office, a room that smelled like bleach and broken dignity, and said it was a staffing adjustment. Her voice was apologetic, but her eyes said, "Don't make this harder than it has to be." Elena didn't argue. She'd known this was coming the moment the glass hit the floor. She cleaned out her locker, a spare pair of shoes, a granola bar, a photograph of Rosa taped to the inside of the door, and took her last paycheck, $412.50 after taxes. Enough for rent. Not enough for rent and groceries and the community college tuition payment due on the 15th. She walked through the service corridor toward the employee exit, the one that opened into an alley so guests would never have to see the people who cleaned their toilets coming and going. She could have left. She should have left. Every rational thought in her head said go home, regroup, figure out another way. But Elena Reyes was not operating on rational thought. She was operating on a promise, and promises don't care about paychecks. She turned around. She walked through the lobby, a space she'd only ever crossed in uniform, invisible part of the furniture, and this time people looked at her because a girl in a housekeeping outfit walking with purpose toward the private elevator is the kind of thing that gets noticed in a hotel where discretion is worth $900 a night. She pressed the button for the 40th floor. The security guard at the desk, a man named James Chen, watched her. He had a hand on his radio. He could have stopped her with a single call. He didn't. He lowered his hand and watched her step into the elevator. Later, people would wonder about that. James Chen had worked security at the Prescott Grand for 3 years. He was quiet, efficient, the kind of man who blended into marble lobbies and wood-paneled hallways like he'd been designed to match the decor. He remembered every employee's name, every guest's face, every delivery driver's route. Everyone assumed he was loyal to Nathan. They were wrong about the loyalty part, but not in the way anyone expected. The elevator doors opened on 40. Elena walked past the executive assistant, who stood up and said, "You can't," and knocked on Nathan Prescott's door. She opened it before he answered. Nathan Prescott was at his desk, phone to his ear mid-sentence about a zoning variance. He looked at Elena, her housekeeping uniform, her red-rimmed eyes, the ceramic cup she was holding, and said into the phone, "I'll call you back." "Mr. Prescott," Elena said, and her voice shook but didn't break. "My name is Elena Reyes. I was a maid here until 10 minutes ago. I need to talk to you about your mother." Nathan's expression didn't change. "My mother is dead." "No, sir," Elena said. She placed the ceramic cup on his desk, bottom up. "She's not. She's in room 12 at Fairview Gardens. She's been there for 10 years. And she writes you messages on the bottom of coffee cups because it's the only way she can." Nathan Prescott stared at the cup. He read the writing on the bottom. He read it again. His hand moved almost involuntarily to the framed photograph on his desk, the one that had been face down for 10 years. He turned it over. A woman in her 50s, laughing, holding a coffee cup, standing in a kitchen in Queens. The cup in the photograph was white ceramic, the same kind. "Get out of my office," Nathan said. His voice was barely a whisper. "Mr. Prescott." "I said get out." Elena didn't move. "Your mother makes her coffee with dark roast cinnamon and brown sugar. She taught my mother the recipe. She calls me Rosie because that's what she called my mother. She has good days and bad days. On good days, she talks about a boy who built hotels and never came to visit. On bad days, she screams because she thinks she's been buried alive." She paused. "You have 27 cups. I have 27 cups. She's been writing to you for years, sir, and nobody listened. Nathan Prescott picked up the photograph. He held it the way Marcus Johnson held a locket, like something that might disappear. His jaw clenched. His eyes were wet, but he didn't blink. He was a man who'd built an empire on control, and right now, control was the only thing between him and the floor. Victor said she died, Nathan said. Victor told me he arranged the funeral. I stood at her grave. I know, Elena said. That's the other thing I need to tell you. She opened her backpack and took out a folder, the one Rosa had hidden in a shoebox in the back of the hallway closet, the one Elena found 3 months after the funeral, the one filled with photocopied invoices, billing records, and a handwritten timeline that Rosa had titled, What I Know. Elena placed it next to the cup. My mother worked at Fairview. She was Grace's caregiver. She found out what was happening, the money, the fake records, all of it. She tried to report it. She was fired. They blacklisted her. She lost her insurance. She got sick. Elena's voice cracked for the first time. She died 14 months ago. She was 41. And the last thing she asked me to do was bring your mother coffee. The room was silent for a long time. Nathan didn't speak. He read Rosa's file. He read the bottom of the cup. He opened his desk drawer, took out his phone, and called a number. Victor, he said. Come to my office now. Then he called a second number. James, he said. 40th floor. Bring everything. Elena sat in the chair across from the desk and waited. She didn't know who James was or what everything meant. She just knew that for the first time in 3 years, someone powerful was listening. Victor Hale arrived in 7 minutes. He walked into Nathan's office, adjusting his glasses, a legal pad under his arm, his face arranged in the expression of mild professional concern that had served him for 22 years. He saw Elena and didn't recognize her. Maids were invisible to Victor by design. Nathan, what's going on? I was in the middle of the Fairview acquisition docs. Sit down, Victor. Victor sat. He crossed his legs. He adjusted his glasses again. Is this about the press conference? I know the optics were. Tell me about my mother's funeral. The question hung in the air like smoke. Victor's pen stopped moving. Nathan, that was 10 years ago. Why are you... Tell me about the casket, Victor. The closed casket. Per her wishes, you said. Nathan's voice was flat, the voice of a man holding something explosive and deciding where to aim it. Who chose the flowers, who signed the death certificate, who arranged the plot at Woodlawn. Victor's left hand, resting on the legal pad, began to tap index finger, middle finger, index finger, a rhythm Elena had seen before. Her mother's file mentioned it. Rosa had written VH taps fingers when lying. Every meeting, every time. Nathan, I don't understand what's happening here. Victor looked at Elena. Who is this? Why is there a housekeeper in your office? Her name is Elena Reyes, Nathan said. Her mother was Rosa Reyes. Rosa was a caregiver at Fairview Gardens. She worked in room 12. He paused. Do you know what's in room 12? Victor's finger stopped tapping. The room temperature didn't change, but something shifted, a barometric drop, the kind animals sense before a storm. Room 12 is... I don't have the facility's room assignments memorized, Nathan. I handle finances, not... My mother is in room 12. The words landed like a hammer on glass. Victor's face went through a sequence that Elena would later describe to investigators as a screensaver crashing confusion, then recognition, then the rapid calculation of a man who'd spent 22 years making numbers lie and was now watching them tell the truth. That's Nathan, your mother passed away in... She's alive, Victor. She's 74 years old. She has Alzheimer's. She's been living in a facility you told me didn't exist under a fake name for a decade. Nathan placed the ceramic cup on the desk, then the folder. Then he turned his laptop screen around. On it, the framed photograph of Grace holding her coffee cup in Queens. She still makes the same face when she drinks coffee. Did you know that I didn't? Because you told me she was dead. Victor Hale did what cornered men have done since the invention of corners. He tried to rewrite reality. Nathan, listen to me. Your mother's condition deteriorated rapidly. The facility in Connecticut, there were complications. I made a judgment call to spare you the... There was no facility in Connecticut. The voice came from the doorway. James Chen, head of security, stood in the frame holding a black binder. He wasn't alone. Behind him were two women in suits and a man with a badge. The brochures were fabricated. James continued, stepping into the room. The 2 visits you made were to a rented event space in Hartford with hired staff. I have the rental receipts, the staffing invoices, and the payment trail, all from accounts controlled by Mr. Hale. He placed the binder on Nathan's desk. FBI Financial Crimes Division has been investigating the Prescott Family Trust for 11 months. I was placed here to monitor internal operations. James Chen was not a security guard. He was a federal agent. He'd been embedded at the Prescott Grand since the Bureau received an anonymous tip, a tip that originated from a photocopied file mailed from a Washington Heights apartment, stamped 2 days before Rosa Reyes died. Rosa's last act hadn't been the coffee request. Her second-to-last act was mailing a copy of everything she had to the FBI. The Bureau opened a case. They placed James. They watched. And they waited for what they always wait for: someone on the inside to make a mistake big enough to prosecute. Victor Hale had made that mistake when he authorized the Fairview demolition, because demolishing Fairview meant relocating patients, which meant new paperwork for Grace Mitchell, which triggered a records review that connected the fake name to a social security number belonging to a woman officially declared dead 10 years ago. Victor had spent a decade hiding a living woman. And then he tried to tear down the building she was hidden in. Victor stood up. His face had gone the color of old concrete. "I want my lawyer." "That's your right," said the woman with the badge. "Victor Hale, you are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, elder abuse, identity fraud, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. You have the right to remain silent." Victor didn't go silent. Victor went loud. "This is insane. Nathan, I built this company with you. I was there from the beginning. Everything you have, I helped." "You stole from my mother's trust," Nathan said. His voice hadn't risen once. It didn't need to. "You hid her in a facility where the paint peels off the walls. You told me she was dead. You let me grieve for 10 years. He picked up the ceramic cup and turned it over. "And she spent those 10 years writing me notes on the bottoms of coffee cups, because she knew. Even when she couldn't remember what year it was, she knew that someone would come." He looked at Elena. Someone did. Victor was escorted out of the building at 11:47 a.m. The Prescott Grand's lobby cameras captured the moment a 60-year-old man in handcuffs, glasses, askew, being led past the marble fountain he'd helped pay for with stolen money. A bellhop stopped mid-step. 2 guests at the front desk turned and stared. The concierge, a woman named Patricia, who'd worked there for 12 years and had always thought Victor was a little too quiet, put her hand over her mouth. The footage was on every news channel by noon. Nathan's PR team issued a statement at 1 p.m. Nathan Prescott has learned that his mother, Grace Prescott, reported deceased in 2014, is alive and has been the victim of a decade-long fraud perpetrated by Victor Hale. Mr. Prescott is with his mother. He asks for privacy. He didn't get privacy. He got a media hurricane. By 2 p.m., Room 12 was trending on every social media platform. By 4 p.m., #CoffeeCupEvidence joined it. By 6 p.m., Gina Baxter, who'd broken the Covington story and had a nose for institutional rot, had published a 4,000-word investigation titled "The Woman in Room 12: How a Billionaire's Mother Was Hidden in Plain Sight for a Decade." The piece detailed Victor's shell companies, Rosa's termination, and the 27 coffee cups. Gina had interviewed 3 former Fairview employees, a forensic accountant, and in a moment that made her career, Grace Prescott herself, during a lucid window who said 7 words that became the most shared quote of the year. I wrote it down. I always wrote it down. By midnight, 8 million people had read the article. The comments were a flood of fury and heartbreak. He told his own partner his mother was dead. Rosa Reyes died because she did the right thing and the system punished her for it. An 18-year-old Maid did what a $9.7 billion company couldn't. Those coffee cups. God, those coffee cups. Someone started a GoFundMe for Elena's college tuition. It raised $340,000 in 48 hours. Elena asked them to redirect it to Fairview's patient fund. They did. Nathan Prescott drove to Fairview Gardens that afternoon. He didn't take the town car. He didn't call his driver. He drove himself, a thing he hadn't done in years, because billionaires don't drive, they're driven, and somewhere in the accumulation of wealth, he'd lost the muscle memory of ordinary things. He sat in a rented sedan outside the facility engine, idling hands gripping the wheel at 10 and 2 like a teenager on his first drive. He stared at the building, the one he'd seen on a spreadsheet as Parcel 7B assessed value $4.2 million acquisition target, and for the first time saw it as what it was, a place where 80 people lived and slept and ate and waited for visitors who mostly never came. The paint was peeling in long strips like the building was shedding its skin. The front steps had a crack running through the center that someone had filled with caulk. 2 window air conditioning units hung at crooked angles, humming and dripping condensation onto the sidewalk. A hand-lettered sign by the door said, "Visitors welcome, please sign in." Nathan sat in the car for 20 minutes. He wasn't afraid of what he'd find. He was afraid of what he'd feel. Elena was waiting by the front entrance. She hadn't been called. She hadn't been asked. She was there because 3 years of 5:15 a.m. visits had taught her something about showing up. You don't wait for an invitation. You just go. Nathan got out of the car. He was wearing a $3,000 suit and shoes that cost more than Fairview's monthly food budget, and he'd never looked more out of place in his life. He stood on the cracked sidewalk and looked up at the building where his mother had spent 3,650 days, 10 years of mornings and afternoons and nights, 10 Christmases, 10 birthdays, 10,000 cups of coffee while he stood at a grave in Woodlawn and talked to an empty casket. "She's having a good day," Elena said. Nathan looked at her. This girl, 18, fired from his hotel that morning, standing in a housekeeping uniform she no longer had reason to wear, was the only person on earth who could tell him whether today was a day his mother would know his face. "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means she'll probably know you." Elena paused. "But even if she doesn't go in anyway, she knows the feeling even when she doesn't know the name." Elena led him to room 12. The hallway smelled like institutional soup and floor cleaner, a smell that hit Nathan like a physical thing. The contrast between this and the lobby of his hotel with its imported marble and $200 candles was so stark, it felt like violence. She stopped at the door. Room 12 was small, 12 by 14, barely enough for the single bed, a nightstand with a reading lamp that buzzed faintly, and the chair by the window where Grace liked to sit in the afternoon light. The walls were bare except for one thing, a framed photograph of a young man in a suit, standing in front of a boutique hotel, grinning like he'd just conquered the world. Nathan at 29, opening day of the Prescott Grand. Grace had kept that photograph for 10 years, through every bad day, every forgotten name, every moment, when the disease took another piece of her, and she held on to this one image like a life raft. She forgot her son's face on bad days. She never forgot the photograph. Nathan stood in the doorway and couldn't move. His mother was sitting in the chair by the window holding a white ceramic cup, staring at the light coming through the glass. Her hair was silver and thin. Her hands trembled. She was wearing a cardigan that Elena had bought from a thrift store because the facility didn't provide warm enough clothes in winter. "Grace," Elena said softly, "someone's here to see you." Grace turned. She looked at Nathan. The recognition didn't come immediately. It flickered like a candle in a draft, and for a terrible moment Nathan thought she wouldn't know him. that this would be Connecticut all over again, that he'd traveled 10 years of grief only to arrive at a stranger. Then Grace looked at the photograph on the wall. She looked back at Nathan, and the flicker held. "Nathan," she whispered. "Baby, Nathan Prescott, $9.7 billion, 16 hotels, a reputation that made investors sweat, dropped to his knees on the linoleum floor of room 12 and put his head in his mother's lap and sobbed. He cried the way people cry when they've been holding it for a decade, ugly, shaking, formless." Grace put her trembling hand on his head. She didn't fully understand why he was crying. She didn't need to. "It's okay, baby," she said. "Mama's here. Mama's right here." She looked at Elena standing in the doorway holding 2 cups of cinnamon coffee. "Rosie," Grace said, "you brought my boy?" "You finally brought my boy." Elena nodded. She set the coffee on the nightstand. She walked out into the hallway. She sat on the floor with her back against the wall and listened to a billionaire cry in his mother's arms. And she thought about her own mother, Rosa, who made the coffee, who kept the secret, who filed the report, who lost everything, who died at 41, who mailed the evidence with her last strength, who asked for one thing: take care of Miss Grace. Elena closed her eyes. "I did it, Mama," she whispered. "He's home." The fallout was seismic. Victor Hale's trial lasted 3 months. The evidence was overwhelming. The coffee cups alone, authenticated by 3 forensic handwriting analysts and 1 neurological expert who testified that Grace Prescott's number recall was consistent with a phenomenon called islands of preserved memory, common in certain Alzheimer's patients, constituted a financial roadmap of the fraud. The SD card Rosa had mailed to the FBI contained 340 digitized documents. James Chen's 11 months of surveillance produced 200 hours of recorded conversations. Victor's defense attorney argued that Grace's writing was unreliable, that Rosa's files were obtained illegally, and that Nathan himself bore responsibility for not checking on his mother. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. 37 charges. 28 years in federal prison. Dennis Blakely, the Fairview administrator, pleaded guilty to conspiracy and received 6 years. The contractor who falsified Rosa's termination records received 3. Nathan Prescott canceled the Fairview demolition. He didn't just cancel it, he funded a $35 million renovation that transformed the facility into the Rosa Reyes Center for Elder Care, a model facility with a 3-to-1 patient-to-caregiver ratio, on-site neurological specialists, and a policy that every patient's real name must appear on their door. Grace Prescott's room was expanded. Her photograph wall was filled. Nathan visited every day, not every Sunday, every day. He brought the coffee himself, now made from Grace's recipe, dark roast cinnamon brown sugar. He wasn't good at making it at first. Elena taught him. They stood in the facility's kitchen at 6 a.m., and Elena showed a billionaire how to use a $30 mocha pot, and Nathan burned the first 3 batches, and Grace tasted the 4th one and said, "Almost, baby. Almost." It became their morning routine. Elena made it. Nathan watched. Grace judged. On the day Nathan finally got it right, the ratio, the temperature, the exact half spoon of brown sugar. Grace took a sip, closed her eyes, and said, "That's it. That's the one." Nathan framed that coffee cup. It sits on his desk next to the photograph, which is no longer face down. Elena Reyes received a full scholarship to Columbia University, funded by the Prescott Foundation's newly established Rosa Reyes Memorial Education Fund. She's studying forensic accounting. Nathan offered to pay for any school she wanted anywhere in the world. Elena chose Columbia because it was 40 minutes from Fairview on the subway, and she wasn't about to stop bringing coffee. The fund has since provided scholarships to 214 students from families affected by workplace retaliation. Elena sits on its advisory board, the youngest member by 20 years. When reporters ask why she spent 3 years bringing coffee to a woman she barely knew, Elena says the same thing every time. I knew her. My mama knew her. Knowing someone doesn't require them knowing you back. The 27 ceramic cups are displayed in a glass case in the lobby of the Rosa Reyes Center. Each cup is turned bottom up so visitors can read Grace's handwriting, the shaking, careful numbers that brought down a $240 million fraud. The plaque beneath them reads, "Written by Grace Prescott, carried by Rosa Reyes, delivered by Elena Reyes. Some messages take years to arrive. The important ones always do." Grace Prescott has good days and bad days. On good days, she knows Nathan's name, holds his hand, and asks about the hotels. On bad days, she calls Elena Rosie and asks when dinner is. On all days, she drinks her coffee, dark roast cinnamon brown sugar, and something in her face softens a muscle memory of comfort that lives deeper than disease, deeper than betrayal, deeper than 10 years of being buried alive in a room the world forgot. Nathan sits beside her. Elena brings the cups. The coffee is always hot, not warm. Hot, because Grace deserves that. She always did. Victor Hale filed an appeal from federal prison. It was denied. He filed a second. Denied. His wife liquidated their assets and moved to Florida. His name was removed from every building, every program, every plaque. The only place Victor Hale's name still appears is on 27 coffee cups written in a 74-year-old woman's handwriting next to numbers he thought no one would ever find. Sometimes the truth hides in the smallest places. A cup, a recipe, a promise between a dying woman and her 15-year-old daughter. Sometimes the most powerful person in the room isn't the one with the money or the title. It's the one who shows up every morning, before dawn, with 2 cups of coffee, because someone asked her to. Elena still makes the coffee at 5:15 a.m. She still walks 4 blocks. She still sits in room 12. Some mornings, Grace knows her. Some mornings, she doesn't. But every morning when Elena hands her the cup, dark roast cinnamon half-spoon of brown sugar, Grace closes her eyes, breathes in, and smiles. And that smile is worth more than every hotel Nathan Prescott ever built. Because you can buy a skyline, you can't buy that. The Rosa Reyes Center for Elder Care serves 120 patients across 2 facilities. For every dollar donated, 96 cents reaches a patient. Because someone is finally watching the cups.